Hey guys, Liz here from the Nail Hub, and I really wanted to revisit one of the videos that I did with the amazing Jim McConnell from Light Elegance not too long ago. If you haven't watched that video, I really recommend you go back and watch it as well because I feel like with these more complex topics, the more frequent that you are exposed to the information, the more it starts to click. And also, one of the challenges we had when we were filming together was we did all of this amazing content and our audio was not working when we were recording. And so it just kind of added a little bit of a barrier to be able to really get immersed in the information. Not bad, but I also kind of wanted to revisit this topic anyway, because like I said, I think the more you're exposed to this information, the more you're able to absorb it and the more you're able to understand. And for me, it's taken me a few times to really learn all of this and to really understand it. So I thought I would do this one more time. So the video that we were talking about is it cured? And we did a series together about just gel in general. What is gel? You know, the chemistry behind it, how it cures, how it behaves, all of those different things. Because if there's anything I can say about the gel nail industry and about using gel nail products is that application and understanding how to apply them properly is about this much of what you need to know when it comes to being successful with them. I would argue that more importantly is the chemistry behind these products, because if you truly understand what gel is and how it behaves and what's happening with it when you're using it, you will better understand how to troubleshoot things, how to anticipate things, and you'll have a confidence level when it comes to purchases and all kinds of stuff. So the more I have learned about chemistry, the more empowered I have become with my products. And so I thought we would sit down together at my home studio and revisit this topic one more time. Okay, so as part of this experiment that we did with Jim and I, we were using a thermometer or thermometer, however you want to pronounce it. And I got this one on Amazon for, I think it was like $32 or $35. Stuff on Amazon tends to fluctuate a little bit, but it's something in the ballpark of like 35 bucks. And I thought that was a great deal for a piece of equipment that I can use at home or in, the studio or in a salon setting to be able to take down data on my products. So real quick, before I get into like what we're doing and why we're doing it, I wanted to just show you how to use this thing real quick. So it comes with different types of sensors. It comes with like a metal wand type of sensor that's like a hard metal wand. And then it also comes with these more wire type sensors, which I think probably work better for gel, but you could try both depending on what you're doing. If you had the gel in a cup or something, you could do that. Or if you're trying to measure different temperatures of like liquids, I think the wand would work really well because you can just stick it in a little cup. But for the sake of doing this gel experiment, I am using the wires. And so this end of it is the part where it takes the reading, and then it's got these little plugs on the end that plug into the actual thermometer. Okay, so important is it's got these poles here. So we've got positive and negative poles on the thermometer. And also you'll see, it's kind of hard to see on camera, but on the back, like this is the front of the plug. On the back of the plug, it has poles as well. So it has a positive and negative pole here. So just make sure that you line up positive with positive and negative with negative. So I'm going to plug this in like that. And same thing here, positive and negative, which it ends up working out with the K being up. But just FYI, just make sure you've got the poles in the right position. Okay. On here also, if I power this on, okay, you have the ability to do a few different things. So you can switch between Celsius, Kelvin, Celsius, or Fahrenheit. And you can see the little indicator up here about how it's taking the temperature reading. The other cool thing is it'll tell you right here which reading it's taking right now. So this is T1. So that means it's taking this sensor's temperature and it's putting that as the output. So T1 is right here, so it's reading 82.4 and it's touching my leg right now, so that's probably why. If I bring T1 up and I just do ambient room temperature, it should cool down to something like 73, maybe 74. And it also has a T2, so I have the other side, which is T2, and if I want to switch between them, I'm going to push this button down here, so it goes between T1 and T2. So now I have my T2 reading here on the other one. The other cool thing, I'm going to back out just a little bit just so you can see all of it at the same time, It also has the ability to compare the two temperatures. So instead of just flipping back and forth between the readings of the two sensors, I can also read the difference or the temperature differential between the two sensors. And so what it's going to do is it's going to take T1 and subtract T2 and give me a difference in the readout. So if I push this button, you'll see that there's a 0.5 degree difference between T1 and T2. You can ignore the negative for now because basically if this one gets a little bit warmer, that will turn into a positive differential. So it's just because it's taking T1 minus T2. So if T1 is a little bit colder, you're going to get a negative readout. But I like to look at this as an absolute value, and an absolute value means forget about whether or not it's positive or negative for right now. We just want to know what the difference is in the temperature between the two sensors, okay? All right, so that's how to use this guy. So what are we trying to achieve with this experiment that we did? Well, there's several ways to understand how our gel is curing, and this is one of them. So you might recall from the video, or if you haven't watched it, and I might have mentioned it here on my channel a couple times, is when gel is exposed to ultraviolet light, there's a chemical reaction that starts that's called polymerization. So basically what we're doing is we're taking a liquid product, we're exposing it to ultraviolet light, the ultraviolet light kicks off the chemical reaction, and through the chemical reaction we take a liquid and we make it into a solid. So that bonding process that happens, there are essentially, if you want to think about them as like contact points for where the molecules are going to come together, or the monomers for that matter, are going to come together and they're going to start to create these bonds. So if we think about these things floating out there, in space, kind of floating around, they're going to come together, they're going to touch, and they're going to make those connections. So when they make those connections as part of the chemical reaction, the byproduct is heat. Heat gets released as part of the energy that's being used to create these bonds. And when the bonds are finished, heat gets released from the product. So that is what we feel as that burning sensation. Sometimes, depending on the gel that we're using and the lamp we're using, we can get this kind of burning sensation on our nails. And that's because there actually is heat being released as part of this curing process, okay? So one of the other important things that we talked about, Jim and I together, was how monomer-based products that have a ton of monomer in them versus products that have less monomers and more oligomers in them, how there's more contact points with smaller, with more monomers, since monomers are single structures, right? Single atom structures. We have a ton more of them than we would if we had, semi-bonded, already kind of preformed oligomers. So the way I understood it was this, which is monomer-based product, right, is like this, okay? So we have a ton of these little, even if I have the same 2 tablespoons of rice, or I have 2 tablespoons of this elbow macaroni, okay? The same 2 tablespoons of rice is going to have that many more actual kernels of rice. So if we think about this as our monomer, we obviously have more kernels of rice in here, which means more touch points for those bonding areas, those bonding sites, which means more areas that the heat is going to be released from, okay? If I'm using more oligomers in my product, okay, and this is obviously a bigger jar, but if I have the same kind of handful, right, of macaroni, same like volume of macaroni, I'm going to have less actual pieces of macaroni than of rice. So I'm going to have less contact points or less bonding sites for that molecular polymerization chemical reaction, which means I'm going to have less places where heat is being released. Therefore, the total amount of heat that's going to be released is less. Okay? So let me draw this for you just to give you kind of a visual of what we're really talking about. And again, if I'm explaining this, some of you love that I explain things multiple times. Some of you hate that I explain things multiple times. But I find that not everyone gets it. It doesn't click for everyone in the same way. So I like to explain things in several different ways so that it'll click for all of you at some point, okay? So here's my molecules here. And this could be, we'll call them monomers. And I don't have different colored pens, but I can also make, here's a star for our, like our UV initiators. So these are the things that react to the UV light and start the chemical reaction. And I might have monomers floating out here, and then maybe I also have oligomers out here too. Okay, so here's my oligomers. All right. So if we have a ton of monomers, right, because oligomers are kind of like preformed, if you want to think about them as like preformed structures that we are able to, kind of already take monomers, manipulate that into chains. So instead of like a single molecule, we're actually able to make like these chains of different chemicals. And one of the things I like about Light Elegance is they use long chain oligomers. So they use, long structures. It might look something like this. Okay, so here's our like oligomer chain. The cool thing is if you really think about it, it's only got maybe a couple contact points that we're going to do with the chain. If you have tons of monomers like this in the formula, right? You've got tons more places where everything is going to bond and also heat is going to be released. So at the end of the day, when we do the chemical reaction, essentially what we're doing is we're connecting all of these things, and it may look more crystalline in structure, and I'll show you what that means in a second. But just for the sake of like showing you what this kind of looks like, right? So maybe these all bond together, whatever. The UV initiators are just for starting the chemical reaction. So at the end of the day, we may end up with something that looks like this. And it depends on what the material is, but usually with some kind of like plastic or glass or structure like that, we end up with some kind of like actual nice crystal, bonded structure for something that's hard. So we go from something that's liquid, we use these little initiators to start the chemical reaction, and then by the end of it, we have some kind of solid bonded structure that then it went from liquid to solid, okay? So each time something is bonding to the end, so if we have this bond to a different oligomer chain, right? We've got this part is going to release heat and this part is going to release heat. And if we have lots of monomers bonding together, you can imagine how many places it's going to release heat. So that is why we get more heat with a monomer-based product or a heavily monomer-based product versus a product that has less monomer, more oligomers in it. And it's just because of the sheer amount of bonding sites when we actually go to create those molecular bonds, okay? So I hope that makes sense as far as the quantity of where the heat is actually coming from and how, depending on the gel formula, that's how we can end up getting more heat, less heat, or just differences in heat, okay? So that's part of the experiment, which is the thermometer allows us to see how much heat is being released by our gel, just talking about how much heat. Is it too much heat? And that is something that comes down to kind of a safety issue, which is, I don't know about you, but I've also had scenarios where I was using, I hate using the word cheap because that's not necessarily the case. However, if you're using a very heavy monomer product where it's more monomer than anything else, it can produce enough heat that it can actually cause essentially like chemical burns or like actually heat burns on your nail bed. And I had that happen really bad one time where I was using a gel polish that I had used before. And yeah, it had a heat spike to it, which I was like, whoa, that's hot. But not too bad. And I was using it in a traditional CFL lamp. So those like two bulbs that does cure a little bit slower. So, okay, fine, a little bit of a heat spike, but it wasn't bad because the curing process was a little bit slower due to the type of lamp I was using and whatever. Then fast forward to me getting an LED style UV lamp. LED is a much faster curing process because the light is much more focused and much more potent. So you're able to cure faster than a CFL, which means that the heat is produced that much faster. And the other thing that I did was I was using like that metal foil stuff, like the gold leaf type of looking stuff. I embedded that in the gel. And when I did that, the foil actually trapped the heat from the chemical reaction and kept it on my nail bed. And I actually got such a bad burn that I had a bruise on my actual nail bed, like a blood blister underneath my nail bed after I took my gel off. And I knew how hot it was because like my finger hurt really bad. But I didn't know how bad it was until I actually took the color off and I saw the damage that was underneath. So just sheerly talking about the amount of heat that's produced is also an important factor for understanding how much of a heat spike is this gel going to produce just alone, okay? The other part about this experiment that's interesting is it also allows us to check the differential in ambient temperature and how the gel is, and also measure if the gel is fully curing, okay? So we've got these two different scenarios. We have the just like how much heat, right? And then we also have the ability to measure, is the gel fully cured? Right? So this is really important also because as we wear our gel, monomers like HEMA, for example, which HEMA is one of those things that for some people tends to create an allergic reaction in their body. HEMA is water soluble. So if our gel is not fully cured, it could be that over the 2 or 3 weeks that we are wearing our gel, that some of that monomer is leaching out of the actual product and getting into our skin and into our bloodstream. So you can imagine every time you wash your hands or something like that, the water is actually carrying the HEMA across our skin, and then our skin has the ability to absorb that monomer, and then our body, depending on how our immune system responds, some people, it may cause no reaction whatsoever, but for some people, it creates an immune response, which your body goes, what is this? Get it out of me. And that's where we start to get things like contact dermatitis, allergies, etc. Okay. So this is it fully cured thing is also equally important because we want to make sure that our gel is cured to a safe level. What is a safe level? Well, I think per my understanding, and again, I might have to defer to Jim on this, but from my understanding, anything that's 70% plus is what we consider safely cured, to a point where you're not going to be getting, hardly any type of leaching of the product out, if it's being exposed to water or just even sheer, just wearing it on your skin or whatever. If you have like a little bit of gel accidentally touching your cuticle or something, that can also happen. So 70% or better is really what we look for. And it's also one of the, difficult things that you might be asking is like, well, how do I measure this 70%, right? And I might do another video where I go into kind of like measuring like, where the temperature reading drops off and how you could tell that it's like 70% there. However, I think more importantly, one of the sheer indicators or the obvious indicators that Jim gave us in the video that we did together was that if there is still being heat released, okay, so if we cure our nail for the full time frame that we're supposed to cure it. So let's say our gel says you're supposed to cure this gel for 30 seconds in an LED lamp. Okay, and if we cure that gel for the 30 seconds and we let the gel cool down back to ambient temperature, right? So like in here, it's like maybe 75. If I let the gel cool back down to 75 degrees, and I go and I cure it again for another 30 seconds, if I still see a dramatic heat spike on that gel, it's telling me that the polymerization, that bonding and that forming of that molecular structure did not complete on the first round of light exposure. So if we see that, maybe the temperature goes from an ambient temperature of 75 and it spikes up 40 degrees beyond that. So it goes up to about 120. I'm just using like an extreme example. Let's say it goes up to 120. The lamp goes off. The temperature comes back down to ambient temperature of 80 degrees. So I know that 40 degrees worth of heat was released during that first curing cycle. If on the second time that I cure that gel, I get 30 degrees of temperature again, as a heat spike. So it goes from 80 to 110. I can tell that the gel was not fully cured on that first round of curing. And this is important for you guys to just get a general idea of, especially when we're talking about mixing and matching gels and lamps. If you're buying like some random Amazon $25 LED lamp, and I know that not everybody wants to invest a ton of money in their equipment or can't invest a ton of money in their equipment, I totally get it. But one of the really important parts about gels in general is that if our lamp is not powerful enough, and wattage really is only one part of that puzzle. I hate that we use wattage as an indicator for lamps because wattage really only tells you about the power consumption. It doesn't tell you about how high quality the LEDs are. It doesn't tell you about how much UV light is being outputted or how focused the UV light is. It doesn't tell you any of those things. It's just a general kind of power indicator, and it usually refers to how many LEDs are inside the lamp, because if we have, 20 2-watt LEDs, it's going to be a 40-watt lamp. So it's kind of annoying because it just tells you quantity of LEDs and how much power they're consuming. It doesn't really tell you how amazing your lamp is or how well it's going to cure all of your product. So as a general kind of way for you to test this, regardless of what lamp you have, regardless of what gels you own or the combination of any of those things, we can use a thermometer to really indicate to us, is my lamp curing this gel in the 30 seconds that I think it's supposed to be fully cured? Or does my lamp need to cure it longer? Or if I continue to expose it to UV light, does the gel ever fully cure, right? And again, this is one experiment that we can do to kind of triangulate that information, but I think it's an important thing to really understand. And I think this is a cool thing to be able to do for $35 and check if your gel is fully curing. Obviously, there's things like the gel is still liquid or it's bubbly and it like smushes out the sides and only the top is cured. Obviously, there's those kind of visual indicators that the gel is not fully curing. And I've shown you guys like the form test and all of that stuff. But this is kind of one of those things where even if the gel looks like it's cured from the outside and it feels hard, maybe it's not fully cured, and maybe you do have the situation where monomer might be leaching out over time, getting into your skin or your client's skin and potentially causing allergies. And that's really where the risk comes from, is people being overexposed to these products in a way that they were not intended to be exposed, and people's immune systems potentially causing a reaction to them. Okay, so without me being more long-winded, because I know some of you hate when I get talking, I wanted to show you quickly how to actually run this experiment. So what I did for convenience sake is I took my my lamp base, this is just the metal base out of my lamp, and I put some tin foil on it just to kind of protect it from any goobers or anything that's going to get on it. You could also easily do this with a backing, like a foil, sorry, not foil, a form backing, like if you have paper left over from where you've used up forms, if you have nail forms, if you have parchment, if you have tin foil, if you have wax paper, saran wrap, clear plastic, whatever, just anything to put your gel on, okay? So let's take any type of gel, and it can be clear, it can be pink, it can be anything. So let's just grab a spatula here, and I'm just going to take some of my gel. And we also want to make it a realistic layer. So like imagine we're testing how much heat, because if we just make like a blob like this, okay, and you can see how like thick this blob is, realistically, we're never going to put this much gel on one finger at a time. So just make sure that it's kind of like a nice even coating, like how we would actually do it if it was on a nail. And also we want to make sure that like light's able to permeate it all the way through to just, we don't want to like be faking it, to see how poorly it cures. We want to make it a realistic situation so that we get a realistic readout on how much heat is produced by this amount of gel, okay? So I would say that that's kind of a normal thickness for builder gel. If I was actually building like an apex on a nail, it's going to be a relatively, thick coating, much thicker than gel polish, but also, it's not going to be some giant mountain of gel, okay? All right. So before I put this in the lamp, I want to show you what we are doing inside of the actual lamp with the thermometer. So let me just scoot this over just for a second. Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit so you can see. Okay, let me get rid of the reflection here for you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've got this one is my T2, and the one in my left hand, the one in my left hand is T1, just to keep that straight. So left hand is T1, right hand is T2. I'm going to turn on my thermometer, okay? And I'm going to use T1 as the gel reading and T2 as the ambient temperature, just so that I get like a positive number here. It doesn't really matter, but it's just personal preference. Okay, So if I put T1 in the gel, and again, this would be obviously inside the lamp. And if you need to clip this down with something, you can also do that. So I can put this in the gel, make sure it's nice and submerged in there. And then what I can do is I can even just like clip this on the edge. So let me just use like a little clip here. I can bend this a little bit to get just that in the gel. We just want that little wire to be the part that's actually inside the gel. So let me clip this on here. There we go. Okay. So I just want that wire tip to be inside the gel, and I just used like one of my little nail clips to put that in there. And then T2, I'm just going to leave outside of the gel, but I'm also going to put it in the lamp, because inside the lamp, when the bulbs are on, there is going to be heat. It's going to get warmer inside the lamp than just the room temperature, right? And if my hand was in the lamp, my hand would be feeling the same temperature inside the lamp. So I also want to just leave this guy out. So I can even use the same clip, but instead of putting it in the gel, I'm just going to kind of arrange it so that it's floating out in the air, okay? And I actually, just for the sake of keeping this, consistent, I like to make sure that it's not touching the actual base of the lamp. It's literally just in the air. And then this one's inside the gel, okay? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this to the comparison where it's going to tell me the difference. So the gel is like 1.5 degrees warmer than just the air right now. And that's probably just because of the, having like sheer density of something, okay? So I'm just going to take my lamp. I'm just going to put this over. And I'm going to cure this for 60 seconds. And let's just see what kind of reading that we get on this. So typically with builder gels, I like to cure it for about 60 seconds. And so what this is this is temperature difference, and this is the gel starting to get warm, right? So it's basically taking the gel temperature, subtracting the ambient temperature. So this is the true difference between, what my hand would be feeling versus what the actual gel is doing. And we'll see this peak up. And what this is telling us is that those bonds are happening and heat is being released, and this is how much heat is being released during that process. Now, I've seen some of my gels where I tested them depending on the formula. I've seen some of them even approach like 90 degrees before. So that means that the gel is 90 degrees hotter than the ambient temperature of the lamp, which is pretty crazy. So this is peaking at about 46.6. So I'm just going to write that down. Our lamp turned off, so we just completed the full 60-second curing cycle. And then what I want to do is I want to let this fully cool down. So just let it sit there. We want to get this closer to 0 because we want the ambient temperature to be basically the same temperature as the gel. So it might take a minute, but just let this cool down. And I might cut this out just so you guys don't have to sit here and wait with me. But what I'm doing is just letting this cool down back to a difference of 0. Okay, so now that we have the gel back to the ambient temperature, and it's cooled off again so that it's no longer hotter than the ambient temperature inside the lamp. I'm going to run this curing again for 60 seconds just to see if we get another heat spike, which will tell us how well cured the gel was the first time around or how under cured the gel was the first time around. So I'm going to turn my lamp on again for another 60-second session, and we'll see if we get another heat spike out of it. So this information is really important to us now that we completed this. I'm going to take this out of here so you can see. Okay. So again, we can do a visual check on this. You can see that the gel came off totally clean. There's no wet residue on the actual form paper, which tells me that the gel cured all the way through to the bottom. You can even see that it's dry to the touch on the bottom since there was no exposure to oxygen. On the bottom side, it's not even going to be sticky. And you can see that my little sensor is in there, stuck in the gel. So what this tells us is that on the first round of curing, Okay, I wrote down my number here, 46.6. So my ambient temperature right now, let me just get you my ambient temperature. Okay, so my ambient temperature right now is 76.5 degrees. So let me get this out of the way. Okay, so we have 76.5 degrees Fahrenheit is basically the temperature of just the air that was around the gel, okay? And the gel was hotter than that by 46.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So that means that the max temperature that this gel basically would feel like is 123.1 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so this is the heat that would have been on the nail at the time that the gel fully peaked for its exothermic reaction, because this was the hottest that it ever got inside the lamp. So 123 degrees is obviously hot. I mean, Phoenix gets to 123 degrees, but 123 degrees is not necessarily going to burn you or cause any type of issue. It's just going to feel hot. So this isn't a dangerous temperature, so I don't have any real risk of actually burning myself. However, because I've also even been in hot tubs that were that high. I love hot water. I don't know about you guys. However, this is a really important data point because it tells us, is this a safe overall temperature for someone's finger to experience while the gel is polymerizing? The other cool thing is when we cured again, obviously again, our ambient temperature was something like 76.5, but the plus or minus on the gel was only about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So that means that the gel fully cured during the first 60 seconds of lamp exposure. And because I didn't get another heat spike, there was no more bonding happening. There was no more monomers bonding or anything like that. No more, molecular bonding happening, which means no more heat is being released. Therefore, all of my bonding has been completed. So this tells me that a 60-second cure in this lamp actually fully cures this product. Now, I'll tell you, the gel that I used is actually not from the same brand as the lamp that I used. So this actually also tells me something else, which is really important, which is my Cocoist Infinity lamp can successfully cure this brand of gel in 60 seconds, which is awesome. Now, if I changed this curing time to 30 seconds, this whole scenario might not have happened. Maybe this did peak at 46, but maybe this actually peaked again at 27 degrees or something like that. So that would tell me that there was still a little bit of curing that needed to happen even after 30 seconds of UV exposure in that particular lamp. And the other cool thing about this is that, again, like it can tell us about the mixing and matching as well, which I always want to encourage you guys not to mix and match, just because then you have to do this kind of testing to make sure that all of your equipment and your gels and everything are well aligned. So you can save yourself all of that effort by just like buying the lamp that matches the gels that you want to use. But I know that a lot of you will shop around for cheaper equipment because you just want to not spend so much money on a lamp. And maybe you're doing this at home, so you're like, I'm not going to spend, $300 on a nail lamp. I totally get it. But this is important information for us to have that assurance that, yes, I mean, the gel is safely cured. The heat that's being released because of the lamp and gel combo or because of the gel formula is at a safe level. I'm not going to hurt myself or hurt someone else. So it gives us a lot of information just by doing this thermometer experiment. And I think it's a cool data point for you guys to have for your gels, especially since this thermometer cost me like $35. So I really enjoy this kind of stuff. I encourage you guys to also take these readings on your gels, write down like what lamp you're using, what gel you use. Again, write down how much of a temperature differential you got on that first curing cycle. You could do different testings for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, longer. And it will also depend on, is your lamp LED? Is it CFL? The one thing I will tell you that you need to, kind of keep consistent so you don't have too many variables going on is make sure that that amount of gel that you're using is as consistent as possible across the board. Obviously with gel polishes, we're going to be doing much thinner coats, and gel polishes is less of an issue because of the thinness of the coatings that we are doing. It's very unlikely that colors are going to create as much of a heat spike. But for the most part, it's usually like our base coats, our builder gels, sometimes even top coats can do this. So if you're going to be testing the temperature, just make sure that the coating that you're doing on the form or whatever you're putting the gel on is consistent with the amount of gel you would be putting on a finger in a realistic situation. So don't put a giant mountain of base coat, because you really wouldn't be putting a giant mountain of base coat. You can do it just to see how hot it gets, but it's not going to give you that realistic readout on what it would be like on a finger, because again, remember, the more bonding sites, whether it's because of the quantity of the gel or because of the actual quantity of those monomers inside of our gel formula, the more bonding sites there are, the hotter it's going to get. And that's why we get more of a heat spike with a thick layer of builder gel than a thin layer of builder gel. And so there's lots of things we can also do to mitigate heat, even if we are experiencing it. So in the next video, I think I'm going to touch on, taking this one step further, which is, okay, we've got heat. We've got a situation with heat. How can we also help the heat make it more livable if we do have a gel that just has a ridiculous heat spike? And we can talk about flash curing and some of the other things you guys can be doing to really deal with heat. But it is a natural thing that just happens as part of the polymerization process. And I hope this has been instrumental for you to really understand what Jim and I were talking about, and for you to be able to repeat this experiment at home. Okay? Thanks so much for tuning in. See you guys next time. Bye.